Well, perhaps you can imagine the sweaty palms and the dry mouth and the rapid heartbeat. For the rich man has summoned the manager, the trusted servant who took care of his books, the one who would manage all of his accounts, for a high conference meeting. You see, there had been this rumor of mismanagement, and rumors have a life of their own, whether they're true or not. So the appropriate and prudent thing to do for the rich man was to bring the fellow in, audit the books, and the sooner the better. The servant manager had been given his notice, "You're fired," he had heard. So the rich man believed that the rumors to be true, just didn't know the extent of the loss. This terminated manager must have this one last meeting with his boss, and it was going to be a very uncomfortable exit interview. The rich man wanted to see the books. Time for an audit. The manager scrambles to make something good come from a very bad situation. You see, he got the job initially because the boss saw in him some extraordinary qualities. That he was gifted, that he was capable, that he was even shrewd, and now those qualities would come into play. He says, "What will I do? Now that my master is taking the position away from me, I am not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do so that when I am dismissed as manager, people may welcome me into their homes." And so the conniving mind is set loose. He calls in all those who had debts with the rich man and deals with them one by one. The first who comes in owes 100 jugs of olive oil. That's a very large debt, 100 jugs of olive oil. He gives the debtor his account slip and tells him to write through the 100 and instead write in 50. The debt will be cut in half. Now, it's likely that the original debt was somewhat less than 100 jugs of olive oil that were now owed. Jews were not supposed to charge interest to other Jews, or if you read some other portions of the Old Testament, you'll find that they were not supposed to charge interest to anyone of their own tribe or beyond. But perhaps the rich man had seen a business opportunity here, one that couldn't be passed up, and so I would suggest that he was charging interest on the debts. And so there were these interest payments, there was the manager's commission, there was the price of doing business. You understand how that can kind of grow over a period of time? And with the added fees, the debt had swelled now to 100 jars of olive oil. And now in the shadows of the manager's office, the debt has been reduced from 100 down to 50. The second man comes in, and his printout sheet shows a debt of 100 containers of wheat. The manager gives him the slip and says, strike out the 100, write in 80. Again, a sizable reduction. Perhaps interest and commissions and fees were forgiven, along with the generous consideration that would be given to a trusted customer. And so it goes down the list of the debtors. Amounts reduced, debts whittled down. And if you see that much of the story, you say, sounds good. Everybody's going to win on this one. everybody's going to win. The manager's going to win, for as he begins his new career unemployed, he will need all the friends he can have. Certainly these two business associates and others will think well of him, their indebtedness substantially reduced by the stroke of a pen, and some future favors will be in the offing, wouldn't you expect? Those indebted partners, those co-conspirators, they win as well. For the added burden of debt, interest, commissions is gone, and maybe, just maybe, they will be able to survive for another year in the uncertain world of agriculture and weather and all. And even the rich man wins. For even though the payouts are now less than the original, those added interest rates were religiously illegal. He shouldn't have been doing that. And the loss of that money would be more than made up by the goodwill he would receive from others when word got around into the village of what the rich man had done for those poor people indebted to him. So the rich man sees the saving twist in the situation, and he praises this now fired manager of his for his shrewdness. And I think the parable that Jesus taught ends in the middle of the 8th verse. That's all Jesus said. What follows, and you can follow that in the Bible if you want, in the second half of the 8th verse all the way through to the 16th verse, are, I think, added attempts by later people to make sense of a difficult parable. Things that other people in the Christian community were trying to say, what was Jesus thinking? What was he saying? What did he want us to know? And so pieces of other things were shoved into this ending in order to make some sense of things that were hard to understand. So friends, this is my interpretation of the parable as far as it goes into the 8th verse of that chapter. That this is a parable about possessions and loyalties. And it is correctly, I think, summed up in the last verse, verse 16. No slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. This is a parable, unlike others, that has no heroes. There's no good Samaritan lurking around someplace in the story. Everyone in the story is a skunk of varying stripes. That manager had sold himself, wasted his master's money, charging his business clients obsessive commissions, taking advantage of the sweat of other people's brows, using devious methods to save his own skin, trying to make new friends now for obvious favors later on. The manager is not a hero. And the master, he's not a rich man. The rich man, he's not a hero either. For we can devise some clues as to how he got his wealth and how he maintained his wealth. He admires the devious tactics of the fired employee. He probably was charging interest to those who owed him money, regardless of the religious laws of his day. He willingly put a heavy burden on others to enhance his own bottom line. The rich man is not a hero. And those two farmers, burdened with a load of debt, commissions, interest, fees that had piled up. Before you feel too sorry for them, remember that the shrewd manager didn't falsify the accounts. They did. They changed the accounts from 80 to 50. From 100 to 50 and from 100 to 80. They substituted the smaller amount for the larger number, making them co-conspirators. They committed fraud. And so they are not heroes either. And so in each case, it was the power of money and the lure of profit, the enticement of having something a little more for oneself. That's the common denominator of all the people in the parable. Each of them had a price, a threshold at which ethics and propriety and justice and morals be hanged. And often it was in the shadows of the event. It's a dog-eat-dog world out there. We've heard that often. God takes care of those who take care of themselves. We've heard that one. If you don't get them, then they will get you. Take care. And certainly God wants each of us to be successful, to do well. God wants you to have a piece of the pie, even a big piece of the pie. It's interesting how rich people of wealth, are portrayed in the Gospels and in the teachings of Jesus. Jesus taught often about two subjects higher than other subjects. The one was prayer, and the second one was money. Those were priorities for Jesus, prayer and money. Jesus was not bashful about talking about money. And while it is no sin to be rich, it is not a virtue to be rich either, nor is it a virtue to be poor. Jesus was well aware of the enticement of things, of money, and of the status symbols of whatever society in which we are living. He was convinced that an undue fascination with things would blur our perspective of the realm of God. And that money often, and this allure of things, will compromise an otherwise good person. Whether that's an interest-charging rich man or shrewd, conniving manager or an account-changing debtor, they all succumbed. Succumbed to the god of money and of things. In the choice between God and the things God has made possible, their mouths said, "We're with God," but their actions say, "But we love the things that are around us, and we'd like to have more." And so I see this parable as a sharp and stunning confrontation to our smug assertion that that's talking about other people, not about us. That's them, we are clean. That money has no hold on us. We don't crave things. This parable is aimed at someone else, not me. What's interesting is that we are wealthy people. We are wealthier today than we ever would have imagined when we were kids. We have more stuff than our parents had, certainly more than our grandparents had, and we pretty well take it for granted, and we do enjoy it. And so the question is, what do we do with our wealth? Not that we have to give it away necessarily, but how do we live with wealth? And what do we do because we have that wealth? Does our wealth make us generous and gracious and outgoing and willing to be stewards of the wealth that we thought we would be when we didn't have it? Would we be as generous with what we have when we didn't have it and we thought we would be wonderfully generous? Or does our wealth seduce us as much as it did in the people in the parable, making us fudge our ethics and compromise our standards and gild over brave best intentions that we always thought were within us, and always wanting just a little bit more, something we don't yet have? And so I think the Jesus word for us is time for an audit. For all of us. Time to let the parable judge us as to who we are becoming as we live day by day. Amen.